Hey, y'all. Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Tech Backstage. This is live episode 3 of 4 this week before we go into the holidays and the final week of the year. And today I am joined by Rudradeb Mitra, the founder and CEO of Omdena. Ru, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for also inviting me for this podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. I'm not a AI engineer. I started my career as a front end engineer, and then moved a little bit more into full stack and cloud after that. But it's something that I've really started to dive into over the last year or two, and so I would say I'm probably like a hobbyist AI developer right now, but I'm trying to get good at it. Failing more times than not, but it is an area that that interests me a lot, and I think it's an area that the further we go even into the century, the more relevant it's going to become, right? And I think right now that there's so much unknown around it, right? There's so many people that don't really understand how AI works, and there's a lot of people that are even scared of AI. And so when Carlos, our producer, reached out and said that you were interested in coming on the show, and I checked out Omdena and saw what you guys were doing, I thought it'd be a great conversation to just dive in and hopefully try and pull back the curtain a little bit on AI and how it works and whatnot. But before we dive into that, and sorry for talking so much, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your origin story, and just hear how you came to found and be the CEO of Omdena.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eddie. Yeah. So my background is basically coming also from a engineering research background. So I started working in AI way back in 2005, 6. I published research papers, and then kind of I was working in a startup. So that has been my background also. I come from a very technical background. And then there was a phase I did my master's in Cambridge, in University of Cambridge, and then I built a few startups. Some of them failed, some of them succeeded. So that's till 2017 actually. Um, then there was a phase of my life where I felt that making money is not something that really interests me, and I was kind of a bit disappointed with the overall startup ecosystem. That how the focus is all around raising money, making a lot of profits. So I kind of got disconnected from that world. So I had a couple of years off. Luckily, I was invited to be a mentor of Google, and I was also invited to speak in different conferences around the world. So 2017, 18, and partially 19, I spent a lot of time traveling around the world, speaking in different conferences, meeting people. And what I observed that the world has fundamentally changed in two different ways. The one is that there is access to knowledge became very democratized. So you can be anywhere in the world, and you would have the same level of knowledge or access to the knowledge as someone in Stanford or MIT or Cambridge might have. And that created a lot of people out there, super smart, super motivated, who are willing to do great things. But access to all the access to knowledge became very uh, it became very ubiquitous. The opportunities are still restricted to certain groups of people living in certain parts of the world. So I was then realized that I was driven by first say, can I create something where I give opportunities to people from all over the world to come together and build something together. So that was my first motivation. The second motivation was about overall about AI. And as I come from an AI background, and I saw that there is most of the AI solutions that are being built are not for social good, and only a fraction of the work that is being done is in the AI for social good, which we call AI for good. But most of that work is also actually not in the real world application. They're mostly people coming, talking, creating some proof of concept, but that's where it ends. So I was driven by the second part is can I create a platform where we actually only build AI solutions that has a social impact or social or environmental
Right.
overall that we call as in the space called AI for
Yeah.
good. So these are the two things that motivated me to start Omdena.
There is a lot to unpack there. I think that's probably one of the most, at least for me, that's one of the most impactful opening statements that we've had from a guest on the show. There's a lot there, especially. I was reading a really interesting, actually, a blog article. The Somebody at Slight, the product company, they have a blog and they talk about this stuff. And I was reading about how this how SaaS is dead, or not dead, but it's broken because there's this kind of, I want to say that this in the tech industry, there, there's this over productivity that we're all striving for, right? And there's this, just like you're talking about in the startup ecosystem, it's about, trying to find product market fit and then scale as fast as possible and then exit, right? And so it's about trying to raise money to get out the door and to market it and then blow it up and then just sell it off to somebody else, right? And I was actually having that same sort of, when I got back from my morning run this morning, I was having that same kind of like inner dialogue with myself reading that blog post, because I was like, I feel that a lot. You know what I mean? There's a lot of times I get app fatigue, and there's times when sometimes you're in, I don't want to alienate the entire industry, but there are times when you feel like kind of overwhelmed by the requirement to have so much output and so much productivity, and to, always be results driven. Like, hey, what's your monthly recurring revenue, and how many active users do you have per month? And I was actually kind of thinking about that a little bit today, is, how do we actually have an impact globally, not even with tech necessarily, but, just in general, how do we get back a little bit more to center? So anyways, I thought that was a really impactful statement that you talked about right there. And then also, um, talking about how the majority of AI programs aren't actually out there for social good, which is, I think, a place we could actually really use AI, right? So anyways, I thought
Yeah,
that was that.
yeah.
Go
Just
ahead.
to add to that thought of the startup part, and I'm happy to come back to the AI for good part too. Is I wrote an article like few months ago on why VC-backed startups are not good for the world, and why do we need to build a community-first startups. And Omdena is purely build a community-first startup. We haven't raised money from VCs, and we don't want to raise money, because exactly the reason you said, that the whole model of VC is scale, 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 and
Yep.
sell it off. Now, during the process of scaling, you're creating an artificial growth. You're just, which often is not good for the world. Do we e-commerce websites giving all these heavy discounts so that some people go and start buying something? Most of the things people don't even need those
Hmm.
to buy, but they're just buying it because they're giving some discounts. That kind of thing is not what we need in the
Yep.
world. So this whole model is, I think, broken, and we need an alternative model, which Omdena is based on. Is a
Hmm.
community first, where it's first focused on benefiting the
Yep.
community. What is good for the community? Community is people, the world, people who are stakeholders, and that naturally then falls into AI for good. Why are we only talking about AI for good? Because once we keep the focus for the community, the people, then by default, by design, we'll not build something that is not good for the
Yeah.
people. So that's the model that we've tried to follow, and we really believe in that kind of model.
I do really love that. I agree with you on, the current model is, it's kind of like the overconsumption of goods, right? It's, anyways, we could have a whole other conversation on that, and maybe we will in a future episode. But I don't want to get too sidetracked from the AI conversation, because I think a lot of what you're talking about right now even plays into what we were just talking about, with how the startup, the VC backed startup scene is complicated and tricky. But I guess one of the first questions that I have for you, just, around the topic itself, is, you said the majority of AI right now isn't even being used for social good. Like, what do you see it being used for the majority of the time? Like, I mean, I can think of some examples, but I'd love to hear from you about, how you see it being utilized right now.
And most of the solutions is basically business process optimizations. So how can we optimize processes? Whether you can always, maybe some of those cases you can say trickle down somewhere and say, okay, this has social good, but it's not the main purpose of the building the solution. The main purpose is to optimize the processes, tools, not to benefit the people, but to benefit the
Mhm.
business, so that they can save more money. So that's what I.
Do you see one of the things that I was just thinking about too as I was prepping for this, and actually one of the things that probably like disturbs me a little bit is the use of AI in applications as well for engagement or continued use, or for dopamine fixes. Some of the examples I can think of, for example, is like Netflix. The sit around and watch an entire series for 8 hours in a day like didn't really exist before Netflix, right? And it's using these AI models to over optimize the user experience so that the user's really getting what they want. And I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I've been binge watched an entire show, but then there's also the examples of like talking about what happened with Cambridge Analytica, or with Google over optimizing your search results to give you what they think you want, as opposed to maybe giving you a little bit more neutral and like non-biased information, not based on what your past search history is, right? So I think there's a lot of use cases out there where AI is being used, like you said, not just for business productivity, but also for these other things that it's so new we don't even necessarily have quantifiable data on what the long-term impact is going to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, one simple example, you gave the example of Netflix. I can talk about social media, Facebook, for
Yeah.
example, or Twitter. Our feed is based on what we have liked. So
Yep.
we keep on getting the same feed. Now, what does that do? It's, of course, because the companies are optimized to improve the engagement. Engagement is more likes, so I'm getting more likes and share. But what it does is that I am reinforcing my biases. We all are
Yep.
biased, so we are reinforcing. Now, what it does that it divides us more, because all I see is all the feed that I see is basically what agrees with me. So I'm like, wow, everyone agrees with me. Now
Yeah.
suddenly I see one other feed which is completely and I'm like, oh, this guy is somewhere is completely like racist or something, like, because I'm
Yep.
out of the world.
Yep.
But because I just live in my old bubble. So what the social media is doing, because of the optimization of our feeds, creating our own little world, and we all create our own little world more and more, and not having access to another side of the story, and it divides us even more. So
Yeah.
this simple example is showing that how the society is getting more and more divided, and which you can see in today's world, our society is so divided. And the
Yep.
moment, the worst is that in the past, if I get another opinion, I will not react so strong. They're like, okay, that's another opinion. In today's world, the moment you see another opinion, people are like, oh, this person must be a racist, must be something, must be like, that's not normal. That's not possible that someone not agrees with me.
Right. Yeah. I actually that's a really good example because I'm not really a Facebook user anymore, but one thing that I do still use is Instagram. And so like my feed is turned into basically F1 images, like cuz I like F1 racing, and cat memes because my wife loves cats and I send her the cat memes. So now anytime I go on Instagram it's either race cars or cat memes. Um, so, like it's something that I've experienced firsthand. But I guess one question, like following up on that, because I do want to talk a little bit more about the topic in depth, is like, so what does that mean for ethics? Is it ethical for these companies to be doing these types of things? I guess what even is ethical AI, and how do we use AI in like you're talking about to affect the world in a positive way? That's a lot to unpack. Sorry, you can probably answer just one of those questions.
So it is true that it's very difficult to define what is ethics, and I can whether this is an ethics or not. Well, at the end of the day, a company, for example, if driven by profits, then that's okay, because that's what they're driven by. So they are just trying to optimize their bottom line, their KPIs, and the KPI says optimize engagement because that's good for the business. They don't care about whether the engagement leads to more division in the world or not. Now, we can, from their point of view or from a company's point of view, they can say, oh, that's ethical because we are just optimizing what we have been. But from a user point of view, or from my point of view, I think that's not ethical, because it's end up creating more division in the society and in the world.
Right.
So we all can divide in a way. Now, what is ethical AI? Look, and there are so many examples. I can go on and give an example after example where Amazon and Microsoft build something that is not considered ethical, and even they later on saying, okay, that's not ethical. The reason is this, that the key to building ethical AI is understanding what makes an AI unethical. And the thing that the AI itself is not unethical. It's not like the algorithm is ethical or not. The
Right.
key is the data that is being trained on has biases, basically, right? Look,
Yeah.
and as long as you're training your algorithm with a biased data, it will end up being, let's say, unethical because it will be unbiased. Now, why is it a biased data? Because humans have biases. So
Yep.
if a machine is trained just on your data, let's say like you said Instagram, well, that will be biased because that's just using your biases of liking some F1 and cats, let's say, right? Now, that is very important to understand. And the way to build an ethical AI, I say that is an algorithm that tries to take into account multiple views and people, not just relying on a group of people and their biased opinion to train the model, right? And that's where comes Omdena, because when we build a company, it's a platform for people from all over the world, from diverse background, age group, locations to come together, collaborate, and build those models. So these models that we build are not like one engineer necessarily sitting somewhere and building. It's actually through a collaborative effort that these are built. So a
Yeah.
group of people from say 30 countries, 20 countries, from all different backgrounds coming together, and then the chance of identifying the biases in the data and debiasing that, or taking into account different opinions and training the model through different perspectives of the data is much higher. And I
Yeah.
think that's the way to build a more ethical AI solution.
I I got a follow up to that actually, but I think one thing that really surprised me, as somebody who didn't start with data and AI model, like data models, and like training models, was really how simple training AI is, right? Like there's a lot of people out there that I think, like, I kind of conjure up the image of the movie Ex Machina, if you've ever seen it, where it's like it's the sentient robot and it's just like sucking in as much information as it can. But like I remember even like when I first wrote my like my first linear regression, just how easy it was, because you're just looking at your input variables and what you're trying to predict as an output variable, right? And I mean, I know that's a really dumbed down way of looking at it, and there's way more complex modeling out there, but it was kind of surprisingly simple to me. And um to your point too, is when we're doing these models, if you buy, if you take my initial data set, my initial input, and then you feed that into the AI model, and it goes, oh, this is what Eddie likes, and then you go back and feed me what you think I like, and then I start doing it again, then you feed it back to the model. What you end up in is a feedback loop, because you're not actually trying to take in any sort of outside correction, right? Like maybe what you like, or what somebody else likes, right? So um you get in this feedback loop where all of a sudden you start with maybe one thing that's a little bit more tailored to you, but then pretty soon everything's just 100% tailored to you, right? um which is a long way of me kind of asking, and going back to talking about how we use ethical AIs in companies. But do you think there's a way for companies to look at AI a little bit more holistically, right? In the sense is like, and we can use the Netflix and the Facebooks and the Instagrams as an example, but is there a way that a company like that can use AI, but in a way that, like we're talking about for good, where it can still be used productively, but without those biases, and without potentially having those negative effects and those negative side effects?
Well, I mean, of course there is, and there are multiple ways to do it. That so one way is through legislation, right? So the European Union is coming up with new legislation where they said that the social media companies are, I presume for every company, mostly social media, that they have to make the algorithms kind of open source. They have to tell to people why am I getting this particular feed? So that when I get a feed, I should know what makes me get that feed. So it's in a way for through legislation make it force the social media companies to kind of make it transparent algorithms that they are using, so that other people can see that, oh look, or identify the bias. Okay, look, you're using a bias algorithm, so that they are forced to make it kind of unbiased. So let's say that's one way. The other way argument that I kind of often argue is that it's, as I said, through collaboration. When you are making these algorithms, get people who are from diverse backgrounds, so that you are not your algorithm is not driven by the bias of opinion of one person that how should that output or the algorithm should work as. So if you make the designers of the algorithms who are writing this more diverse, then the chances of making such algorithms which are biased is much less. I'm going to give you a simple yeah, sorry.
Oh no, go. Yeah, keep going. I just wanted to piggyback on that, but go. Yeah, finish.
I, I will just give a very simple example, and it's happened with Amazon. This is an example I often say. So, Amazon wrote a recruitment AI software to hire engineers, and they spent a lot of money to do that. And what happened that when they launched that thing, it showed that that algorithm was biased to hire men over women. For
Wow.
exactly the same CV, it was just hiring men. Why so? Because it was trained on a data, because hiring in general, technical hiring is unfortunately biased. So it was trained on the data that was already biased. Simple as that, right? The interesting thing is that why did the people who were building that algorithm, who were actually building the system, did not know that the data that they're training the model on is biased? I mean, they should have already started right from the beginning that, okay, we know that the bias exists in the hiring process, so we shouldn't train the machine only on the data from the hiring. But they didn't do that. And I suspect that because the people who were writing the algorithms never experienced the bias themselves. So they were unaware that the data could be biased. Had they got perhaps a female or maybe someone who had experienced the bias during hiring, if they had that person in the team who were writing the algorithm or building the system, that person would have immediately told, look, we need to debias the data.
Right.
So this is what that's why I say that it's very important to get a group of people from different backgrounds. Now, and I want to stress this point of diversity, because people often say, oh, it should be diverse, men, women, gender, I don't know, sexual orientation, but I'm not talking about that diversity, because I always say that if a group of people, men, women, different gender or kind of sexual orientation, all from the Silicon Valley or all from San Francisco, are not diverse to me. Diversity is people from different backgrounds who are coming in. Maybe, for me, a room with 5 white male, but coming from 5 continents is more diverse
Right.
than, so that's important, that we get people from different backgrounds and make them, then they can work together, collaborate, and they will chances of building a more ethical solution.
I guess the follow up question I had to that was, though, if the people building the AI can't identify the biases initially, how do you identify those? Are you able to audit those data sets, or I mean, do you need to bring in kind of like a neutral third party? But how do you identify, or is it just you have to go back and look at it after the fact? But I mean, how do we make sure that AIs aren't biased, and how do we put it into a repetitive process where we can continue to audit these things?
In the case of the Amazon, and also it happens somehow in other cases where the people who were using it found that bias easily, right? So they were just kind of had that they provided 2 CVs, exactly the same CV but a different gender, and the machine preferred all the time male. So the people were doing that. So of course, the standard process should be that after the model had been built, there should be a validation set, which is kind of someone should be able to build that validation set that validates that the machine is not biased, so that it doesn't kind of prefers one over another with some because of some biases. So there is a standard process that even after if not during the building the model, if it's after end of the model, then there should be a, a validation process. But if not, then you go and launch it, and then people find it out. So in the case of Amazon, it was after they launched it that people found that out.
Interesting. I'd love to dive down that rabbit hole a bit more. In the interest of having about 5 or 6 minutes left here, I do want to talk a little bit more about um, also how this affects the future, right? Because I think, as you know, I think every year AI becomes more and more implemented and ingrained in the things that we do, right? So, um, and I think it's probably scary to hear, if there's, AI bots out there for recruiting that are basically filtering women out. I mean, that's a scary thing to hear, especially if you're a woman, right? And I think it's a little bit worrying for a lot of people that, that they're concerned that, they don't really understand all the inner workings of how AI works, but also if you're hearing things like that where you're like, hey, this, I might get phased out by this, AI algorithm, like, what does the future hold for somebody like me, especially like you were talking about automation backstage, right? So love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on where we headed with AI into the future. Do you see, ethical AI and like we were talking about, like AI for good just kind of inherently built into everything? Do we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we get to that point? What's the future hold for us?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the future holds for us. I
Sorry,
can't predict it, but
loaded
at least I
question.
can. Yeah, I can at least what I say that my what I'm doing is trying to build the future that I would like to see, right? So that's what I cannot say what will be the future, but I think that I hope that we do take into these things into very seriously. We do take into building AI models that are compassionate and conscious. In fact, I had a when I run my own podcast. I had a podcast with David Hansen, who is the creator of Sophia Robot, and we spoke about it. And we are working also how why it is so important to build compassion and consciousness in AI. That why do we want the algorithms to be not just kind of a piece of black boxes that they are input output of data. So I think there's a lot of people who perhaps see things that way, and I think that I'm very optimistic that we can build this kind of solution because people are seeing that that there is a danger if we do not take into account these algorithms which are could be potentially biased and that can lead to more divisions in the society and a whole lot of different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I definitely think, especially with the political climate in the United States during the last election, I think it's easy to see how there could be, very real negative effects from this type of stuff. Um, Also, want to just kind of chat really quick. And again, I'll try not to load this question up uh, on you, but AI and automation, I think there's a lot of talk about this right now and how it's going to affect, not just U.S. jobs but global jobs, right? We've seen Tesla put the Gigafactory in Texas, and a lot of its robots putting the cars together, and a lot of manufacturing's headed that way. Maybe not all of it, but um, and I think we all know that technology changes the job landscape, right? Like we can't, there's jobs that existed, 100, 200 years ago that no longer exist, right? So there is somewhat of a natural evolution in the job market, just kind of based on, you know, innovation and whatnot. But do you see that AI, like, how do you see AI affecting the job market in the future? Do you feel like it's going to remove a lot of jobs? Do you feel like it's actually going to open up the opportunity for a lot of people, maybe who are displaced by automation, to work, in the AI field? How do you see it affecting the job market?
well, again, I try to avoid forecasting the future, but
Right.
I hope again, I hope, and I think it's possible that um, what it to help humans to touch something which is more human in us.
Right.
So algorithms still now, let's say you can create a robot, you can still have a robot in the cashier counter, but you cannot till now replicate in a robot the human interaction, the smiles, the conversations, the empathy. That is very difficult yet to build in robots. So I hope that people, even if they think that their jobs are being threatened, they will start to rediscover their job into being more human. try to, like an accountant, if an accountant is saying, okay, tomorrow a robot can come or an automation can come take away my job, then try to be in more contact with your clients, try to
Right.
create these human relations. So I think if you are afraid of your job, then try to find an aspect in your job that actually makes you a human, that makes us a human, the human interaction, the connections, the empathy. If your job does not require any of those kind of skill set, and if it's a routine work, just the kind of data entry, let's say, then I think it's good that that job goes away to a robot, because in a way that's a waste of human time if we are just doing things that doesn't require our skills. And maybe we should try to find jobs which actually develops our skill as being what actually being us being a human means. So many people hate their jobs, and I think the reason they hate their jobs is also because it doesn't develop, it doesn't help us to develop as humans, it doesn't help us to develop those human connections and the
Right.
bonds. And
Yeah.
so my point is that yes, jobs will go away, specifically jobs which doesn't require any kind of human skills.
Right.
But I think they should go away, because if someone is sitting and doing those work, it's just waste of time and energy for that person.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I agree. I think, and there's a lot of things that you touched on earlier too, just around, you know, making money, and also, talking a little bit about how corporations use these things to make more money. And you actually brought up the fact that one of the ways that we can bake in these ethics into AI is through legislation, right? But we wouldn't need the legislation if the companies just wanted to be responsible about it and do it from the beginning, right? So there's this, I mean, I'm hopeful that in the future there's this world where we aren't doing jobs that we don't have to do to make money that we don't want to spend on things that we don't need, and that the jobs that we do have transition away from, like you said, these things like data entry, and more towards positions that have impact on the world, right? As opposed to sitting at a computer and entering numbers into a spreadsheet. Maybe those jobs can go to the robots, but we can focus more of our time on meaningful tasks. Because again, I think one of the other things that I hear a lot about too is like kind of this productivity fatigue, where you always have to have some sort of output, and you always have to be hitting metrics and KPIs, and again, within the tech scene, but also in other places, because you're in other industries as well. And hopefully there's this world in the future where we can worry a little bit less about that, and I think worry a little bit more about just being human and contributing to the world that we live in. So um, I like your outlook and your philosophy. So
yeah, just to add to that, what you said, I actually write a lot, and I wrote many articles. And one of the articles is about that. I wrote that this idea of productivity as input output, like a machine, that's not what
yep,
humans are. In fact, I'm most productive when I'm doing nothing, when I'm just sitting, when I'm
yep,
meditating. It's because that's where the best ideas come. So
hmm,
we need to get away from this idea of productivity as input output constantly. How do we that's what we humans are actually. So yes, it's very very important. And I think that a lot of stress in the world, most of the mental problem comes from this constant need to be productive, constant need to be doing something, constant need to be then output driven.
hmm,
It's not how we should behave, and I think that when machines are good at doing that, so we should develop our human abilities,
yep, yeah,
compassion, connections, empathy, these kind of things.
yeah, I agree. Well, Rue, we are way over time, but I appreciate you taking the time to stop by and talk all things AI with me. Before we take off, Carlos, do you want to just do the last announcement for the week, and then we'll get out of here?
Absolutely, Eddie. First of all, thank you, Rue, for having joined us today. And I have one more quick announcement for tomorrow, right here on Tech Backstage. We are going to be having the last interview of the year, and that is going to be, excuse me, with Mark Schwaber, the president of Monarch. That's the
Monarch.
name of the company, Monarch. Monarch. And the topic is going to be from Tesla to tractor. He's going to talk about the future, the immediate future of agriculture and technology in agriculture, both hard and soft. So the hardware and the software part. So That's what we're going to have right here on Tech Backstage tomorrow. Join us at 12 noon Pacific time and be here or be square, and happy holidays, every one of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Rue, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you soon.
See you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
I think he forgot about the wrap up. I did tell him